In this video, I would like to share the wiring concept for Siemens PLC S7-1200, specifically for CPU 1215C. This is Siemens S7-1200 PLC with CPU 1215C. Looking at this PLC, we have two digital input channels. The first one is digital input A, channel A, and the second is digital input channel B. For digital input channel A, we have 8 bit starting from bit 0 until bit 7. For channel B, we have 6 bit, which is from bit 0 until bit 5. We also have two channels for discrete output, which is DQA and DQB. For discrete output channel A, we have 8 bit output and 2 bit output for channel B. So now we look at the diagram for CPU 1215C, and from this diagram we can clearly see that for digital input A, digital input channel A, we have 8 bit. Digital input channel B, we have 6 bit. Digital output channel A, we have 8 bits. And for digital output channel B, we have 2 bits. On top of that, we also have analog channel, which is analog output channel, and analog input channel. So for analog output, we have 2 channels, which is channel 0 and channel 1. And for analog input, we also have 2 channels, which is channel 0 and channel 1. Take a look on the digital input. For digital input, we can connect switches or digital sensor to digital input. For digital input channel, take a look that it's only work for 24 volt DC input, meaning to say we can connect 24 volt switch to the input bits, or we can connect 24 volt discrete type sensor to the digital input channel. For digital output, it is relay type output, whereby we can supply 2 type of live wire into the digital output channel. For example, the first wire we can plug or we can wire DC input 24 volt, and for the second one 2L, we can supply 240 VAC. For analog output and analog input, this is specifically for analog type sensors and analog type actuators. For example, for inputs, for analog type sensors, we can wire or we can connect to flow transmitter, temperature transmitter, pressure transmitter, or level transmitter, as long as it provides 4 to 20 milliamp signal or voltage signal. Similarly, for analog output, we can connect to analog transducer such as current to pneumatic transducer, or solid state relay, or even motor speed regulator, as long as provides signal 4 to 20 milliamp or 0 to 10 volt signal. In order to facilitate the wiring concept of S7-1200 PLC, or specifically S7-1215 PLC layout, has been simplified in order to show the concept of the wiring. So as mentioned earlier, PLC still have the input terminal and output terminal. About the input terminal consists of digital input terminal, which is digital input A and digital input B, and also analog input channel. On the other hand, the output part also consists of digital output channel and analog output channel. The digital output channel consists of 2, which is digital output A and digital output B, and analog output channel. Observe that we have D ground, stand for digital ground, we have A ground, stand for analog ground, and we have L1 and L2 for supplying 2 type of live terminal. The live, neutral, and earth terminal should be wired to 240 VAC line. The good thing about S7-1200 PLC is it have built-in power supply, and that built-in power supply provide the positive 24 volt DC output. revisit the PLC layout, the 24-volt DC output is here. This 24-volt DC supply is very useful to build up the sensor circuit or the switch circuit for digital input and digital output. As mentioned earlier in this video, the D ground stands for digital ground, meaning to say they have to be connected to minus 24-volt DC, which is this one. For digital output circuit, observe that we have L1, which stands for input live 1, and L2 stands for input live 2. And both live terminals have to be connected to the positive side of voltage supply, provide power to the output. For example, we can choose positive DC supply for L1 or positive AC supply for L2. In order to connect switches or discrete sensor to digital input channel, we have to connect that particular sensor with a positive supply, which is a 24 volt. Assume we have a push button, for example. So this is a normally open push button, and assume that this push button is connected to one bit of the digital input, and we assume that this push button is connected to bit 2 of the digital input channel. One end of the push button should be connected to the bit 2, and the other end should be connected to positive 24 volt DC. And if we have a second push button or second switch, assume that we have a normally closed switch, and this normally closed switch, assume that it is connected to bit 6 of digital input. So one end is connected to bit 6, the other end have to be connected to positive 24 volt. For digital output, assume that we're going to connect one of the bit from the digital output to indicators, for example, and that indicator require positive 24 volt DC supply. Therefore, positive 24 volt DC supply have to be connected to L1, assuming that this indicator is connected to bit 2 of the digital output channel. One end of the output device have to be connected to the terminal, the other end have to be connected to the negative 24 volt DC. Function of analog input channel is to get measurement from transducer. Some example of transducers such as temperature transmitter, pressure transmitter, flow transmitter, and even level transmitter. Transducer or transmitter provide analog value, most commonly in terms of voltage or current. It can be between 0 to 10 volt for voltage or 4 to 20 milliamp if the measurement using current. There are several types of transducer. There are 2 wires transducer, 3 wires transducer, and 4 wires transducer. Assuming that we are going to wire 2 wire transducer on our PLC, and assume that we are using pressure transmitter. This pressure transmitter required positive 24 volt DC for internal circuitry. So one terminal will be wired to positive 24 volt, which is this one. Another terminal from the pressure transducer will go to analog input channel. Assume that we're going to wire to input word 0. The negative 24 volt DC should be wired to analog ground. So this is the basis of wiring analog transmitter or analog transducer into analog input channel. For analog output, assume that we're going to wire one of the output word of the analog output to current to pneumatic transducer. One terminal of I2P transducer should be connected to output word of the analog output, and the other terminal should be connected to analog ground, which is internally connected to negative 24 volt DC.